Hey, I'm trying to learn a new programming language. It's been really hard. This is why this series exists. The language in particular was based on the title, but it's that language. So one of the things that's been difficult for me in learning Rust is that it's one, memory safe, two, it's strongly typed, three, is very verbose. I'm not used to having to make every call and then checking the output of every potential error here. While that's useful to do, sometimes I just want to make an API call. So, what do we do? I think that my end goal for this is going to be building little projects along the way, but the format of this video series is basically just me going through one chapter at a time and trying to discuss what I think is important to learn, things that maybe weren't clear from the text in the book, and then after I get through this book to actually work through a bigger project here. Future me here. I'm actually editing this in from a later date after this video was edited, and some of the people I showed it to weren't super clear as to what this video series is aimed to do. So the intention is that if you're like me trying to learn this language and you're going through the Rust doc that contains all this information, link in the description, but also available on the Rust main website, and you seem to run into issues similar to me, or you find that having somebody along with you in that journey is useful, this is the video series for you. I have a background in more web network related things, and so it'd be useful to make something interesting and fun with this language and that, but really I know what gets them clicks, and it's a game. So I'm going to try to make a game at the end of this, and if it's trash, well, then you know not to learn this language. Maybe just look at that last video first. I mean, I wouldn't, if I were you, I wouldn't waste all my time watching the rest of them. Okay, so that seems to make sense. Some things that I thought were interesting here, and perhaps maybe I can zoom in and provide that data. Okay, yeah, ignore the background stuff. It's not upside down, everything's fine. One thing that this book does as like a convenience is that it points to some Rust up website, and I'm certain that this is a perfectly legitimate site. It's not going to do anything malicious, but doing this is really bad, mainly because you're taking something that you don't understand and then executing it on your machine. This isn't done as like a super user per se, but that's a really bad paradigm to follow, and somebody who's like just learning a language, maybe the convenience outweighs that, but I don't like that. So if I was making a recommendation here, it'd be like curl this to a file and then say like, we can look through this file using the following, blah, to determine if it's okay, and then we can take the output of that file and execute it as bash. Don't like that pattern, not great, but I get it. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and this is because I'm not really a Windows person, is that they have this command to get your particular user here. I don't know if that's super visible, but it's using percents to get like an environment variable inside Windows land, which is kind of cool. I didn't think I'd have to learn any of that stuff, but I'm going to do this on Windows because I think that's what most people use, and not really what I'm familiar with. One last thing that I thought was interesting here is when it goes through like the actual compiling and executing of your program, it takes some time to talk about this Rust C, which for people that are familiar with like a C type or Go or Java, where you have a compiled language, I mean, this is really what I think I'd be doing most of the time. But immediately after, it talks about their build tooling, all called Cargo. And it's nice. I guess they had some benefit of history on their side, because they essentially took all the like packaging, library files, all that stuff, and kind of built it into the language with this tool called Cargo. So for most times, instead of actually running Rust C to compile the program, I think most people are actually just going to be using this Cargo tool, and they're going to be able to just say like Cargo build, and then it's going to work just fine and do all the other fun bits under the hood, rather than having to like call Rust C each time. The other thing that I thought was interesting was they have this this build command, which will produce the actual binary, but they also have a check, which is essentially just going through the steps, but not actually producing that executable, which could be useful to be like, hey, is this code syntactically appropriate? I think if I was going to build something into my terminal that says, hey, as I'm working through this code and I save it, is it correct? Did I make any syntax errors before I actually run it? I can build that into the terminal with something like a cargo check, rather than having to worry about getting a linter and all that stuff, and just simply get a thumbs up, thumbs down on that. So that's actually pretty cool. Not a whole lot here, so I'm going to actually go to my computer and do all these steps and see whether or not this made sense, whether or not it's an accurate depiction of reality. Okay, so that was actually pretty simple. At least the pipe from the shell and get an installation. I'm running on the Windows subsystem for Linux. Maybe that's a little bit not part of the scope of this kind of video series, but what's interesting in this is that everything just kind of worked out of the box, but it did change something in my path. So if I had just initially ran this and I didn't restart my my terminal here, I probably would be a little bit confused because it wouldn't show a lot of these commands being available as a part of my path. So that's maybe a little gotcha that I didn't see expressed in the books, but that maybe is just me. And the other thing that I thought was interesting here is like any sort of compiled language, we actually just get an executable here. So if I actually look at that, we can see that it's a executable x64 elf, just compiled for this particular machine. And it's in this debug folder because I haven't included a release on the actual build step. But this executable here is actually what's going to be called under the hood if I run something like cargo run. So cargo run will actually go through the building and then actually executing of that particular target. So it really looks like they've made it so that you don't have to do a whole lot of the underlying file manipulation stuff, and that a lot of this is kind of just built into the cargo tool, so that's pretty cool. I'm going to take one more look because while I think that this downloading and piping to shell works great, I do want to see what it would look like natively on Windows. Okay, so this worked very similarly. It's inside the Windows command prompt, and one thing that I noticed this time is that it did inform me that the shell needed to be restarted, and at least in this case it actually restarted the shell for me so that I wouldn't run into an issue where it wouldn't have had the commands that I'm expecting to have installed. So that was overall pretty easy. It looked like the hello world step works perfectly fine. It's actually part of the initializing of a new project, so I think that's it for this first lesson.